American beef could soon be on its way to China again. The U.S. Department of Commerce announced last week a commitment between the two countries in which China would resume U.S. beef imports no later than July 16th of this year. But there are several key questions that remain. Those we'll discuss in a minute. Until last fall, China had barred U.S. beef after a case of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, emerged in the states in December 2003. That ban was technically lifted on September 22, 2016. As then Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack said when he visited Omaha the following day, that was only the first step. China is the most populous nation in the world and has nearly 1.4 billion people and brought in $2.3 billion worth of beef in 2015. Its beef and veal purchases have skyrocketed more than 800% since 2012, and the USDA is projecting China and Hong Kong will combine to overtake the U.S. as the world's largest importer in 2017. On Monday, we talked with Mississippi State Extension livestock economist Josh Maples about the trade hurdles ahead, but we started by asking simply, how big of a deal is this?
Jeff, this is a big deal. We've been trying to get the Chinese market back open to U.S. beef for over 13 years now, and this is the first time that we actually have a date. So China is the most populated country in the world, and they have a growing taste for beef, and this represents a multi-billion-dollar market that U.S. beef producers will hopefully soon have access to.
Tell me about that market now and who the competitors might be.
Sure. So one thing to point out is the Chinese market, as far as per capita consumption, is quite a bit lower than it is here in the U.S. So Chinese consumers only consume 12 to 13 pounds of beef per person per year. This is compared to 56 or 57 pounds here in the U.S. But the huge population numbers in China still make China a major importer of beef. So we already have access to Hong Kong, but China imported nearly 90% of their beef from just 4 countries, which is Brazil, Uruguay, Australia, and New Zealand.
Imports are supposed to resume by mid-July. What needs to happen between now and then?
Sure. So the White House called it one more round of technical consultations. So it appears that we're still finalizing some trade protocol negotiations. This is where we're deciding exactly what type of products will be allowed and what the actual specific details of the trade will be. So I think that's what we're still working on and what we've got to get done before exports to China can resume.
Can you go further into that? Which products might get in right away and which might have to wait?
Sure. So, we're still lacking on details a little bit for what the U.S. deal is going to be, but we can look to a similar deal that Canada got back. They started in 2011 with China, whenever they could resume exporting beef to China. So, and there were certain specifications on the beef that they could send to China and still are. And those specifications include traceability, so the beef, the animal that the beef comes from has to be traceable back to the farm level. There's also a regulation on no beta agonist use, so the beef has to be free of beta agonist. And then there's some other details as well. So the beef has to come from animals younger than 30 months of age, and it can only be frozen either boneless. And then last year they actually started allowing bone-in beef from Canada. So again, this is the Canada deal. The U.S. deal, we're still working on these details, and we're trying, but these are just some examples of some of the details that we might face as well.
Let's talk more about those potential hurdles. Beta agonists, hormones, this being grain-fed versus grass-fed, are those things that could be in concern?
Sure, and they're likely something that's already being part of negotiations right now. So the beta agonist discussion is one in specific that, or in particular, that we really expect to be part of the U.S. Trade deal discussions. So if you look at Canada, the beef that Canada can export to China has to be free of beta agonist. And so this has a lot of people thinking that the beef the U.S. is going to export to China will also have to be beta agonist free. So we don't have an indication yet. There's been no reports about what the actual trade specifications are, but that's one point in particular that we're looking forward to finding out whether the regulation will be there.
Hormones?
Hormones are another thing, and again, we're really just lacking on information right now, Jeff. So the report last week just didn't didn't really get into those level of details, and this is all something that's probably still, or is still, part of the technical consultations that are ongoing.
And still too early to talk about tariffs or potential tariffs?
Yes, I think it's definitely too early to talk about that. Those are probably being talked about on some level right now during the consultations, but as far as being able to guess about what the tariffs might be, I don't think we're that far into the process yet.
So 6 to 12 months out, what do you think will be considered a success for the U.S. beef industry when it comes to China?
I think that any shipment of beef to China from the U.S. in 2017 should be marked as a huge success. Again, this is something we've been working on for a long time, and China just represents such a large growth potential for U.S. beef. So we should caution ourselves a little bit that the short-term benefits are likely not, or will definitely not be as great as the long-term benefits. So the long-term benefits are remarkable, and this point right here is what has everybody so excited about this announcement and hopeful that this thing actually does go through this year.